Hi, I'm Tia Blassingame. I'm Assistant Professor of Book Arts at Scripps College, and I lead the Scripps College Press, experimental student bookbinding and letterpress printing laboratory on Scripps College campus. I'd like to thank the Scripps Fine Arts Foundation for inviting me to speak about my work. I'll be presenting 4 artist book projects or series, one of which includes multiple books that have an underlying theme of exploring different ways of reading. Throughout my talk, I'll be sharing how I'm attempting to engage the viewer reader in a conversation about historical and contemporary racism by using printmaking and book arts techniques to seduce the reader through materiality, color, tactility, pacing, um, in order to kind of slow the reader's impulse to flee or avoid a discussion of race and racism, as well as incorporating archival documents, research, and my own writing. The first work I'd like to share is part of a set of multiple books or series of multiple books, Settled African American Sediment or Constant Middle Passage. This piece is long stitch bound in goat leather. That cover is not hard bound, it sort of flaps loose. So you really have to, when you engage with the book, you really have to kind of hold the book almost as though you're kind of cradling a baby. That leather feels nice on the skin, so you kind of want to hold on to it and stroke it. And so what does that mean for the reader when they're engaged in that sort of physical way with the piece? The disruptive and mournful effects that death or kidnapping, abuse or assault can have upon a reader, upon an individual or a community, can transcend the borders of distance and time. The humiliation and confusion felt by a newly enslaved child in the 18th century may not be dissimilar from that felt by a similarly hued child in the 21st century. Both would be exposed to violence and constant threat. During the 1764-5 voyage of the Sally, the Brown family, and that's tied to the Brown University, Brown family slaving ship from West Africa to the West Indies, 109 out of 196 enslaved people died due to suicide, disease, starvation, and injuries inflicted during a failed insurrection. Using the line items from the ship's account book that noted their deaths, I attempted to embody them by repeating that brief notation in human forms on the page. Poems and concrete poems were created in response to contemporary incidents from the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Akai Gurley. This would be for Marissa Alexander, where we have the bullseye of text with additional text representing bullets flying. To Eric Garner. This is from Eric Garner. With this piece, there's what you see as the concrete poem, that image of the body sort of falling in water, that middle passage representation. But there's also the traditional poem, as well as each of these different sets of poems have the title and then sort of line of information about the individual, in this case, Eric Garner, 43-year-old father of 6, choked and killed by police officers in Staten Island, New York on July 17, 2014, after being stopped for selling cigarettes without a license. The sort of original poem, and when there's original poem and the concrete poem, typically the concrete poem is kind of a reimagining of the traditional poem. From Eric Garner. He is his own witness, seeping into your psyche, undeniable. You're watching yourself shift into a witness. You see a murder unfolding. He sacrifices the body, transforming you, buckling divisions between neighbors, revealing them as strangers in a gasp, in a plea, on the witness stand of his own murder in progress, your tax dollars at work. And then the text for that sort of reimagined poem in the concrete poem. He is his own witness, seeping into your psyche, undeniable. You are watching yourself shift into a witness. You see a murder unfolding. He sacrifices the body, transforming you, buckling divisions between. Next part of this set of poems. So again, we have settled that sort of looks at ways of reading with the traditional poems as image, to Slavery's Historic House Signs, which is a scroll book out of fabric, in this case cyanotypes on cotton, bounded by velvet. This piece is a little under 15 feet long. There's a detail incorporating that printmaking tarlatan. You have that nice orderly pattern, as well as the unraveling of that as well. This work represents an alternative family tree for the Brown family of Providence, Rhode Island. Pulling from archival research, a line of enslaved relatives owned by various members of the Brown family is connected across this scroll. As the viewer walks along its length, they reconstruct a family tree and move along a simulated street where the names of those enslaved relatives are privileged over those of their owners. With minimal text stretched across a long surface bordered by sumptuous velvet, the book explores methods of reading, in this case, walking along as you're reading, as you would walk along, and you might read street signs or street house numbers and speaking about race. The next in this series is Negro's a Handbook, and I'll sort of come back to this part of the series later in my talk. This is again long stitch. Text is letterpress printed poetry with pressure printing. On the cover, the sort of indicator on the cover of sea glass actually represents the name of the book without actually printing the name on it. What would it look like for each African-American man, woman, and child to have a handbook, a guidebook that would give you insight into who they are, what they feel, their accumulated experiences? Such books could show the diversity of the African-American experience and maybe help white Americans move beyond prejudices and stereotypes. As this is my guidebook, it is letterpress printed in colors inspired by sea glass and shells collected on the Rhode Island shoreline. And I'll read one piece. In this case, each poem is listed as a chapter of that guidebook. And this is chapter 11, Omission. Dream for dream, struggle for struggle, we are missing, not missed. I built the White House and Capitol building. I have the pay stubs to prove. I handled marble, brought masterpiece from its cold, placid plains. I built your cities that you have been telling me all along are not my cities. Sweat for sweat, callus for callus, we are missing. I watched the afterbirth from your eyes. I stroked your temples to turn crying to cooing. I taught you how to turn your mouth for a whistle. I do these things and others that you will not for your children. Prayer for prayer, hymn for hymn, we are missing. I spit on, dog sicked on, walked in the road so you could stroll the sidewalk. I wore holy shoes and unraveling pants, soaked by tires splashing puddles. I caught colds waiting in the rain at the back door colored entrance. I stood for you to sit, erasing me page for page, line for line. The next artist book project I want to share is includes three different segments, and it's called Morning Warning. And in many ways, I see this as part of that series, first series, with that underlying theme of ways of reading. But this very much sort of became its own series in its own right. And it includes two pieces. The first two, an Abecedarian and ABC book, and numbers and repeaters are digitally printed pieces. Stripping the maritime alphabet of its primary colors and replacing them with muted browns and blacks. Morning Warning highlights the relationship of Americans of the African diaspora to water, maritime travel, and the need for an alternative means of communication in times of emergency and duress. How do you send a warning call that hatred comes in waves? Morning Warning serves as a method of honoring, mourning, and remembering the slain and wronged, as well as teaching our children and ourselves to be vigilant and wary in hostile terrain, where your skin color makes you an easy target. Fundraising, this is actually sales proceeds for this served as a fundraiser to donate money to the Innocence Project, the NAACP, and Southern Poverty Law. So you have the alphabet as well as numbers and repeaters. And so, when I started this piece, I really had initially wanted to just create flags, but due to time constraints, financial constraints, I wasn't able to do that. Although I'm very pleased with how the digitally printed book turned out. I felt like that made it much more accessible. I'm delighted to have been able to turn this into flags. So this was up at Santa Barbara City College. The flags are about 2 feet by 2 feet. So you can see in the window, at least one of the flags sort of showing through that we're outside as well. So it includes that title flag as well as a colophon flag. And I'm sort of delighted. This is going to be up at the Center for Book Arts in New York a little bit later in November into December as well. And so you see number 5 from the numbers and repeaters is the flag for Freddie Gray. And then the actual flag. The next piece that I'm going to share is part of a larger set of 2 books, but I'm just going to show one. And this is separate from the Morning Warning series. This is I Am. It's letterpress printed with pressure prints. I place myself as a stand-in for African American victims of police brutality, violence, and humiliation. Unlike the victims and their families, I control which images are shared. I can delete information, backgrounds, people. I can alter color, scale, orientation. The accompanying letterpress text serves as captions, shows how ridiculous racial profiling and postmortem media portrayals of African American victims can be. Personal and family photographs were digitally manipulated, then hand cut and assembled as paper matrices. With each photograph and subsequent turn of the page, I Am represents both the abrupt end of a life and the fashioning of another story, another take. Typically that take that we can recognize, at least with this pairing, as being ridiculous. A baby does not become a toddler, standing unsteady with her hand patting an ottoman as her father watches television in the background. The toddler does not spend her 10th summer at summer camp, making friends, swimming at the pool, and so on. The next work I actually want to just sort of show some of the background of making. So letterpress printed using our lovely Scripps College Old Style, where each character, each space between characters and words, between lines represents a piece of metal. So this is the introduction typeset and placed on the press bed. And there is printed on the drying rack. And then bound into the book with the image of the author or artist as not credible. The next work I want to talk about is students, or the 14 Negro students of Noyes Academy, Canaan, New Hampshire. This piece is risograph printed. You can think of it as a kind of a cross between Xerox and screen printing. Printed during last summer, I received an artist residency with the International Print Center of New York. And that gave me an opportunity to do some printing at the Robert Blackburn printmaking workshop. This artist book consists of two-sided folded brochure with text by the author and 19th century verse by Henry Highland Garnet and Thomas S. Sidney, African-American students of Noyes Academy, an integrated school in Canaan, New Hampshire. The front of students discusses my research on the students, their birth status as free or enslaved, information about them if I could find it, their name, or unknown if I could not locate their name. Images in red also appear of the boarding house where several students resided. The backside has their verse set against a background of the 24-star flag that would have been used during the school's tenure from 1834 to 35. And the text at the top is by Thomas S. Sidney when he was a student at the African Free School in New York City, which a number of the students were, including Henry Highland Garland. So the smaller text on freedom was written prior to attending the school. And then the larger text by Garnet was written a few years after leaving the school, and really speaks directly to the students' experience of being run out of the school, and rather run out of the town of Canaan, New Hampshire. Sometimes we walk streets, saluted we have been by guns and drums and cowbells too, and horns of polished tin. With warnings, threats, and words severe, they visit us at times, and gladly would they send us off to Africa's burning climes. The book form of students was inspired by the brochures available at the National Park Service and historical sites across the country. As such, it is meant to be informative and guide you in connecting our history to our current situation. The color scheme, red, black, and blue, ties directly to the colors of the flag, but also colors that represent struggle, pain, black and blue, red, respectively. Um, the next piece, or last piece I want to talk about my own work, Colored Handbook, is part of a series with Negro's a Handbook that was shown at the start of my talk. And it incorporates some similar facets to Negro's a Handbook. It incorporates my own writing or on poetry. In this case, letterpress printed and digitally printed. And this is a piece I'm finishing up now, working on the containers for that. And so the wooden containers, what I'm doing is I'm staining them with persimmon juice to dye them, sort of a rich reddish brown. And I'm sort of going over this a few times, so I'm getting close to being finished. So Negro's is considered to be a companion to Negro's a Handbook. So Colored combines letterpress and digitally printed poetry with persimmon dyed handmade paste paper. So on the right, you can see the text printed on top of paste paper. On the left, you can see the persimmon dyed page, but you also get the kind of striations coming through from the other side of the paste paper. So the process of making the paste paper for this book kind of really enlivened my studios with bright colors, patterns, the dyeing process that involves sort of a darkening of the paper. And that's happening also with the containers as well over a course of about 30 days to kind of a deep, rich brown. During that, the paper is regularly burnished to heighten its glossiness and kind of lacquer-like appearance. And then the wood also, as I said, goes through a similar process. So the poems in this piece are written kind of over the course of several decades during trips to Russia, New York, Missouri, artist residencies in Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Mexico. While, while living in Connecticut, District of Columbia, and California. So the titular poem, colored over a landscape drab and desolate, hanging on like a dream. Turquoise, pink, lavender, yellow houses chained together, dragging their rainbow from the valley floor into the sun, marched across squad cars and security fences displaying hope. Colored simultaneously positions itself in an era where Americans of African descent were labeled such, colored, but moves and shifts across time to explore various realities. Disappointment, longing, love, hope, wonder are all part of this artist's book. My wish is that some of the joy and wonder that I experienced in the creation of it, and particularly in the creation of the paste papers, will transfer to the reader as they touch, turn, and read the pages. So on the left, you have that paste paper side. On the right, you can see the interior of this chapter 8. And then you can also see sort of some of the ink from the making of the paste paper kind of transferring inside. And then mainly you have the brush strokes of applying the persimmon juice. And I sort of close my talk by speaking about what I consider to be kind of an extension of the work that I've been trying to do in my practice. And so last year I created a collective of book and print artists as well as scholars. And so with the idea of bringing together scholars of book history, print culture, into conversation and collaboration with BIPOC book artists, paper makers, curators, letterpress printers, paper cut artists, you know, that the world of book arts is quite expansive, so trying to pull from that sort of voluminous expanse of the field to build community as well as support systems for those artists and scholars. So at this point, we're a group of about 28 scholars and artists, and we are continuing to grow. And so hopefully our shared, I believe our shared passion for book arts, the unique potential of artist books as vehicles for social change and racial unity sort of grounds us. And out of that, I believe our current and future collaborations across media and disciplines will continue to morph and shift as our group grows, but also as our connections within the group deepen. So we have some what I see as collaborations. So in December, I'll be speaking in conversation with one of the scholars around anti-racist books. And that's through University of Maryland. And then started in toward the end of October. And then again in November, small groups of us have been presenting work in panels through the Bibliographical Society of America. Then in January, we'll come together to be in conversation. Also looking at ways that the artists involved can collaborate on creating new work, as well as creating new work with the scholars, skill sharing, but really supporting one another, whatever that looks like for each person. That's going to be different what they need. That's going to change over time as well. And so really, hopefully we can create a support system, but also sort of community as well. Thank you very much.